Hello there, it's good to be with you again. I do hope you've enjoyed the previous videos. It's an absolute pleasure for me to make these videos, and as I said, it's been a while since I last made a video. The title of my message today is Do Business Till I Come. Do Business Till I Come. In another translation, the King James Version, it's also called Occupy Till I Come, and I'll explain to you what I mean by this. This video will be longer than the previous videos that I've made on this channel. And also, it will be a two-part series. So today I will lay the foundation. And then in the next video, I will then build on what I've discussed today. And then I'll be talking about how do we respond? What are the responses I see in the world around us? There are different people, perhaps at a different level of faith. Some Christians, some maybe not Christians. Some not understanding the events that we see through the lens of the Bible. And so that's what I want to do in the next video. So the title of the message today is Do Business Till I Come. And it's taken up in Luke 19, verse 13, where it says, So he called 10 of his servants, delivered to them 10 minas, and said to them, Do business till I come. Now, this is in reference to a parable that Jesus told to his disciples. And the parable talks about the use of finances, the use of money, the use of talents, you may say. And the focus here is on what to do with the talents that we have. And so it really talks about having a mandate as a believer, as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, to essentially be busy with the master's work till he returns. And the master in this instance is Christ himself. He uses this parable to talk about that. And today I want to discuss a number of aspects. I think I'm going to deal with four major topics in what I understand in my own walk to be very important events that are happening, global events that are happening that are not being discussed in the church. Some may regard it as too complex, others may see it as too controversial, divisive, or political. But as someone said, politics have really infiltrated the church, and so many things that used to be the domain of the spiritual, the domain of the sacred and the divine, have now become political. And so I do think this is a very important topic to discuss. I am going to be discussing it in the context of Bible prophecy or biblical eschatology. Now, eschatology is really the study of the end times. So about 30% of the Bible is really prophecy. So there are a number of different books, 66 books in total in the Bible, and 30% of the Bible's content is really prophecy, foretelling the future. So we have, for example, the book of Isaiah as one example that talks about the coming of Christ, the ministry of Christ, the resurrection and death of Christ, and also the fact that he would be born, a king born essentially from a virgin. And so that we find in the book of Isaiah. Also, the book of Daniel talks about the timing of the birth of Messiah. It also talks about the end of the age. And Jesus himself also quoted from the book, or referred to the book of Daniel in his discourse in Matthew 24, which is also a major prophetic chapter in the New Testament. And then we also find the book of Revelation, which is really the revelation that was given to the Apostle John by Jesus himself post the resurrection and his ascension. So there are a number of prophecies in the Bible. Some of them have been fulfilled, like, for example, the restoration or the rebirth of Israel is one that is taken up in the book of Ezekiel 36 and 37. You would find references to that. But I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on Bible eschatology. There are people that I have followed over the last number of years, and I will be referencing some of those people in this video. And if you're interested, please let me know. I'll also be including it in the comments. I'll include links or the names of some of these Bible teachers that are very good on eschatology, and I will also talk a little bit more in detail in the next video. So what I want to do today is really look at current affairs, what's happening from a political and cultural perspective in the world today. I have heard from some people, some commentators, that today more people than ever is searching. If they do a Google search, they will be searching for, is Jesus coming? Is this the end? Is the end near? And these are people from all walks of life. They may be people that are people of faith, Christians, maybe belong to a different faith. But a lot of people sense that something different is happening. Something is happening. I've also heard Tucker Carlson, which is one of the conservative commentators or big commentators on the right. And I'll explain what I mean by left and right just in a moment. But Tucker Carlson, you'll have seen that he's left sort of the legacy media where he was, television, and he's now got his own podcast, or essentially a journal program on YouTube. And it's been quite successful. I think he's the most successful podcaster with Joe Rogan, which I'll talk about a little later as well. But Tucker Carlson, if you look at some of his videos, he's also been starting to talk about the spiritual things, talking about spiritual warfare, about his experiences with the supernatural, which is, you wouldn't have thought a few years ago, someone that is educated, that is seen as above things that can't be seen, sophisticated and so on. And so what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way, the world is changing, and many people from different walks of life are waking up to this. So my plea is that this video would be helpful to you, whether you are a professing Christian, whether you are searching for God, searching for the divine, the spiritual, or you're just someone that is curious and you've happened to stumble upon this video. So please feel free to like, to share, to comment, and I hope you enjoy this video. Like I said, today there's many things happening in the world. Certainly from my perspective, I see a lot of the things that are prophesied in the Bible happening. You may have a different perspective. In your mind, it might be a scary time, unprecedented or amazing time. And again, in that context, I have been following some commentators for about 2 years now. And you might, what I'm going to say next might sound crazy to you, but I just want to give you a sense of, how things have changed. So I've been following this one, I would call journalist, investigative journalist, Christian, a guy called L.A. Marzulli, right? And L.A. Marzulli has been making these videos on strange phenomena. One of the things he's been talking about for a long while has been the UFO phenomena. And in his mind, the UFOs is really something that is not, as we would have understood it, from a different dimension or different universe or different part of the universe. But in his mind, and he's been having all of these videos, you can follow some of his content. If you're interested, please let me know and I'll provide links for you. But LA has always been talking about, the Genesis 3:15, the seed wars, as he calls it. And you can read Genesis 3:15. I'm not going to go through that in detail because I have quite a lot of content to go through. But I want to make a point looking at what L.A. Marzulli says and what's happening as we speak. So he's been talking about this, and from what I understand, he's been talking about this for about 30 years, and he's been laughed at, this crazy guy, L.A. Marzulli, because in his mind, he's always put forward the position that these are fallen angels that people are perceiving as UFOs. And lo and behold, about, I think this year, maybe starting last year, there's actually been a congressional inquiry in the US legislature, where they have had people in the army, so to speak, or other officials having to report on seeing phenomena that are strange. that are biological material, as they say, and are not human. So, and then they talk about how these phenomena that they see move in a way that is unbeknownst to us, is not any technology that we have. They cannot explain it. So I'm saying all of those things not to scare you, but just to make you aware that there's so many things happening in the world, and it's almost like all the things that we see in the Bible talks about a physical world that God created. He spoke the world into being. And the Bible also says that He created another family, a family of angels. And one of those angels being Lucifer, who took about a third of the angels and then rebelled against God. And so that is the paradigm from which, and certainly I see the world, and you may or may not agree with me. What I'd also like to say is that today, maybe over the last 10, 15, longer than that, but certainly over the last 10 years or so, there's been an increasing move away from the Judeo-Christian values. Many things that we've seen would have agreed to as being right is now called wrong, and wrong is called right. And I want to just spend a few minutes talking about what I call left and right values, because a lot of it will inform how you understand this video, and some of the terminology in the events that I will be highlighting for you should be seen and can be seen through this particular lens. Like I say, today also in the church, we do not talk about a lot of these things, and sometimes the positions we take as believers, as people who hold on to being followers of Christ, are not necessarily always in line with the Bible. And so preaching on sin and repentance has given way about preaching about our best life now, enjoying life, enjoying the blessings of the Lord and so forth. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not the full counsel of God. Paul the Apostle talked about the great apostasy, and you can read about it in Thessalonians, and in the next video I'll talk about more about the Bible. Today I will be talking a lot about current affairs, and I will be quoting media articles both on the left and both on the right, and I'll explain what I mean by left and right. So Paul the Apostle spoke about the great apostasy, and he was saying that before the return of Christ, at the end of time, and this is a prophecy given 2,000 years ago, he was saying that there will be a great falling away from the faith. And he was talking about how society would turn from God, but also particularly the Christian church. The young church that was formed by these apostles, who then grew to billions of people as believers. He was saying that at the end of time, there will be a great apostasy, and we've certainly seen that. So many different teachings in the Christian church, so much of division, and we've seen that. So I'm saying these things not to be judgmental, but to really stir you to reflect on what I'm saying. Is it true? Does it resonate with you? Am I some person in a corner here that really is out there and you can't relate to anything that I'm saying? I hope it's not the case. Having said that, as I mentioned or alluded to earlier on, I come at this from a Christian perspective. I'm a born again Christian. You can reference what I mean by born again Christian by reading John chapter 3, where Jesus spoke to a man called Nicodemus, and he said that you have to be born again to enter the kingdom of heaven, born of the Spirit. So I had that experience when I was about 20 years old. I had this experience with Christ, and I've followed the Lord since then, and obviously not always in a straight line. And 4 years ago, I recommitted my life to the Lord. And since then, I have really focused a lot on being a witness, being salt and light, but also being grounded in the Word. And that is my passion, to share with you my experiences, both in terms of my understanding of the Scriptures, but also what I see in the world, and to be able to equip or warn or edify the body of Christ, but also whoever is watching this video and might have an interest. As I said, I'm a conservative. I'm on the right. I would say on the right of the value spectrum. And what do I mean? So there's essentially two sets of values that we all ascribe to. So if those are on the left, or values on the right. So on the left, you'd find what one might call soft values, and on the right, you would have more of the hard values. And so if one looks at values on the left, you'd find things like compassion, tenderness, love, mercy, kindness, and so on. And you may ask me, what is wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with those values. On the right, you would find fairness, reason, truth, facts, and justice. So the challenge, though, is that, if one would be in the middle, so middle, center left or center right, you probably more or less, there wouldn't be a lot of disagreements. I might add. So on the left, it's more about compassion, not allowing truth to really get in the way of being kind. And we've seen that, for example, if I may make an example, if you look at the immigration crisis in America and also in Europe, the idea is, let the immigrants come to our country. They are suffering where they are living now, and let's not worry too much about rules and regulations. The key thing is really to make sure that these people are safe and loved for and taken care of. Whereas a person on the right might say, fair well, I understand that these people have maybe they're suffering from where they are, but we also need to be careful that there's not criminals and terrorists and people that have pose a risk to our security coming into our country. So therefore we have to have secure borders, and therefore we have to have a vetting process to allow immigrants to come to our country. So I hope that gives you a sense of what I'm talking about. So on the left, people might be more focused on the collective. So we find, for example, in schools, instead of promoting or focusing on winning, the individual winning, whatever sporting event, it might be more of a case of participation awards, not so much, winning. The individual is more the collective, and therefore the inclusiveness and so forth. And again, the challenge is just that can be taken too far. On the right as well, the right focuses on individual rights, on entrepreneurship, in the individual liberties and so forth, and therefore it's about diligence and talent and focus, and therefore awarding the best in any particular field. And again, there needs to be some balance. And we'll read in the Bible that the Bible says in the book of John, the Gospel of John, it says that the law came through Moses. In other words, Moses, the great Old Testament prophet, he brought the law of Moses. In other words, the Ten Commandments, the ceremonial laws that Yahweh gave to the Israelites, to the Jews. And then Jesus was born as the Messiah from the line of David. And now the Bible says in the book of John, it says that the law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. In other words, Jesus believed in absolute truth. He saw himself as the personification of truth, but he also operated with grace. So he had both the left, let me call it the leftist or the soft virtues and the hard virtues. And that is the challenge, is that we have to mix truth with love and grace. It can't just be, love and kindness, but no truth. In other words, someone might say, do not judge, just be kind, just be nice. But if there's no truth, then we might then distort the virtue of love. So I hope that gives you a sense, because I'm going to refer to left and right quite a bit, because that's how the world today, we might not be aware of it, but certainly that's how the world is framed today. So I have followed a number of podcasters over the last while. I haven't followed the media so much, and the reason for that is a lot of the media publications are very much left-leaning, and over time you find that there's, you have to really search for truth, because it's all about the emotion, it's all about the narrative of the oppressed and the oppressor, and colonizer and the colonized. That's kind of the narrative that a lot of the lens through which a lot of the media operates. And so I have, over the last year and a half, I have watched a lot of podcasts. You can go on the internet, the YouTube, and you would find all of these various podcasts. Now, for example, I followed a guy called Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro runs a company called Daily Wire, and he's a Jew, holds on to the Judeo-Christian values, and someone that's very knowledgeable about politics, current affairs, the culture, and so forth. Also, a guy called Matt Walsh, which is a partner of Ben Shapiro, and Ben, for example, Ben and Matt, they collaborate, they work together, they are part and parcel of the same structure. Matt Walsh had a film that where the title of the film is "What Is a Woman," and that's the first time I got to know about Matt, and it's a very interesting movie. That talks about how the whole cultural discomfort with answering what exactly is a woman. So the whole gender confusion, if I might say, Matt had a movie about that, and his podcasts are also very good. Then another lady I've watched is Megyn Kelly. I've been watching Megyn, particularly around the election, the American election, American politics. She's a former journalist, television journalist, and so forth. Another guy I really enjoy watching is Dave Rubin, very funny guy, very knowledgeable, very engaging, and he runs a journal program or podcast called the Rubin Report. I know I'm sharing a lot of information. If you need to watch this in stages, I hope that you do find value in this video. And my heart really is to share with you a lot of content that could help you also navigate this difficult world in which we're living. So another person that I followed is a lady called Caroline Glick, and she's a Jew. She operates from Israel, and I followed her quite diligently when it comes to matters pertaining to Israel, getting information directly from Israel, what's happening in the political milieu, what's happening in terms of the media in Israel, the war in Israel as well. Then also another young man that I've watched is a guy called Maya Tusi. Maya runs a business called Tusi TV, and I've followed him a lot, particularly as it relates to what's happening in Europe. A very good guy to watch. He's formerly from Iran and then became a British citizen. An excellent guy to watch. So as I've said, I haven't watched the mainstream media much. The reason why I spend a bit of time giving you all that background is that I'd like to make the point that I'm not an expert on these global political affairs, current affairs, and even, as it relates to, politics and foreign policy and so forth. But I have immersed myself watching and, reading and, making myself familiar with what's happening around us. So I have some knowledge. And the sources that I will be mentioning will be coming from media articles, but also informed by these different podcasts that I've watched over the last while. So I want to highlight 4 events that I think has significant impact in the world today, prophetic impact, which I think as Christians we should be aware of, we should understand through the lens of Scripture. The first one is the Russia-Ukraine war. And just as a background, this dates back to 2014. So what happened, there was a referendum or a political event in Ukraine where the former president, a man called Viktor Yanukovych, he decided not to participate or join greater economic integration in the European Union in about February 2014. I don't want to get too much in the woods here. I just want to give you a background. And at that point in time, President Vladimir Putin then basically intervened, and he said that he needed to protect the rights of Russian citizens and Russian speakers in Crimea and southeast Ukraine. And what happened then is part of Ukraine, Crimea, was then annexed by Russia. Since then, since about 2 years ago, 2022, there was a full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and this war has been ongoing. And then also the Ukraine forces proved quite a strong opponent to Russia, and you could make of it, many people were surprised by that. and they have actually recaptured about 54% of the territory that was previously occupied by Russia, and Russia still occupies about 18%, according to the information that I have in front of me here. About 278 billion of aid was given to Ukraine by various countries, Europe and also the US, and about 75 billion of that came from the US. And the reason I mention this is because in recent times there's been a lot of discussion about, will this be a catalyst for World War III, or are we already in World War III? Did World War III start with the Gaza war, which I'll talk about later, or did it actually start with this war, or will we never get to World War III, and so forth. Now, I'm going to be sharing media clips with you, and I'm navigating here from my notes, and I'm hoping to then share with you these media articles as part of the video, which I am working with my son to produce these videos. So I'm quoting from an article from the Business Live magazine, which is a South African publication, and it is dated on the 28th of November. So that's literally yesterday. The picture on the left, you see there, it says at the bottom, if Putin succeeds in what he is doing, it could encourage other authoritarian leaders, says the Ukraine ambassador to this country, meaning to South Africa. And the heading says, how Ukraine wants South Africa to push for peace. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole article, but effectively what it's about is this lady called Miss Abravitova, who is the Ukrainian ambassador to South Africa. She's been speaking at an event in Cape Town, South Africa, and she's then made the petition that this war has been going on for about 1,000 days, and she wants the President of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, to intervene when he has the opportunity at the G20 presidency. And if I can read here, she says, our country had just used long-range army tactical missile systems provided by the US. Russia says 6 missiles were fired in the Bryansk region in what it says represents a new phase in the war. And that's why I referenced this, and that's why I referenced the story. So the idea here is that the US have supported the outgoing President Biden, which I'll talk about in a moment as well. He has been supporting, as I said, the Ukrainians with finances, but also in recent days, there has been a statement made by President Biden, who's now the outgoing president, that Ukraine should fire missiles deeper into Russia, and these missiles were then provided by the US and also by other European nations. Now, the next article that I want to show you on this particular item here, it says, it's a CNN article dated in about September. So this is a couple of months back. There's a lot of information on the page, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but the heading there says, Putin issues a nuclear warning to the West over strikes on Russia from Ukraine. I've given you a little bit of background there as well. But it says here, this is a Reuters article. It says, President Vladimir Putin warned the West on Wednesday that Russia could use nuclear weapons if it was struck with conventional missiles, and that Moscow would consider any assault on it supported by nuclear power to be a joint attack. In other words, if the other countries support Ukraine, Russia will then see this as essentially a joint attack against their sovereignty. And it says here in the middle of the page, the 71-year-old Kremlin chief, the primary decision maker on Russia's vast nuclear arsenal, said he wanted to underscore one key thing in particular. It is proposed that aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear state, but with the participation or support of a nuclear state, be considered as their joint attack on Russian Federation. Now, I'm not an expert on the Middle East. There's a couple of people I follow. One guy I follow in particular, which I'll encourage you to watch as well, is a guy called Eric Stakelbeck. He's on Eric Stakelbeck Tonight. And another guy called Chuck Holton, who has a military background. He's also a journalist. video journalist, but he's also got a military background. And he is very good at explaining this. So basically what this is saying is that there are nuclear nations and there are non-nuclear nations. Now, Ukraine is not a nuclear nation. The US and some European countries are nuclear nations. So what the Vladimir Putin is saying is, look, if you guys encourage or support, Ukraine in this manner, then although Ukraine is not a nuclear nation and you guys are, I will effectively then respond with nuclear weapons because nuclear nations are supporting a non-nuclear nation. Now, on the other side, as I said, I'm hoping to present to you different positions. On the other side, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is saying, no, Russia is bluffing. They don't have this type of power. It's all really a bluff. But we don't know. So I think it's important to keep our eye on this and to be aware of this particular event. So I'm going to, just in the interest of time, then move on to the next item, which is Israel, what I called Israel's Seven Front War. And I followed this quite extensively. Some of the people that I followed, I mentioned Chuck Holton. He's got a program called The Hot Zone. He's been a good guy to follow. Then also another man that I followed is Amir Sarfati. Now, I followed Amir for about 2 years now. Amir is an author. I've got one of his books here called, Daniel, a book about the book of Daniel. I think Revealing Daniel is the book's name, or something of that nature. So, he's also a guy that has a military background. So he previously served, I think, in the IDF. So he's got a lot of intel as to what's happening. He's a Messianic Jew. In other words, he's a Jew that believes that in Christ. You might call him a Jewish Christian as well. So I followed his Telegram page for the last year or so. And before then, I followed many of his teachings on Bible eschatology, which is really his passion as well. Then I want to then say that I can provide some of these comments, these links for you if that's helpful to you. But also to say that, look, this is what's informing my information, my perspective on these different matters. So I want to then continue by saying that if you look at the article that I've got there, I've got an article from the Middle East. This article talks about from a publication called dw.com. The headline says October 7 Hamas attacks on Israel a year later. So it reflects on a year since the attacks on Israel. And essentially what's happened on October 7th, Israel was invaded by Hamas. And I'll read for you what it says here. On October 7, 2023, Hamas, the Palestinian militant group that rules the Gaza Strip, led a coordinated attack on Israel. The offensive included launching thousands of rockets at targets in central and southern Israel and breaching the border fence between Israel and Gaza. The attacks killed 1,200 people, including hundreds at a music festival, which was the Nova Music Festival, and then also they took 250 hostages. The report goes on to say that Joe Biden, the outgoing president of the US, says that this is the deadliest attack for Jews since the Holocaust. Now, the Holocaust was where 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis in the 1940s, and he's comparing it to that's the worst. Now, I just want to say, and this is kind of information that, I got from following some of these commentators. My understanding, and I'll talk about it in the next media article, was that the attack on October 7th was followed obviously by a period of relative peace, and the intelligence forces within Israel, the army and political establishment was very much, divided, if I might say so. And there wasn't an awareness that Hamas would attack on that particular day, or that Hamas is an immediate threat, or whatever the case might have been. They were more focused on Hezbollah. And so what the background story is that, and I'll talk a little bit about the connection between Hezbollah and Hamas. Hamas and Hezbollah were supposed to have a coordinated attack on Israel. And it so happened that Hamas didn't share everything with Iran, which is really the behind all of these proxy wars. And I'll explain what I mean by that just now. And so they jumped the gun, so to speak. And because of that, the 1,200 people died, but it could have been far worse, because Hezbollah is a much greater army than Hamas, and the IDF and all the intelligence operatives or infrastructure was really focused more on the Hezbollah threat. Now, as it were, and again, I explained to you the left and the right, people have different narratives, and that's part of the reason why I felt really in my heart compelled to do this video, because there's so many different versions of what one might say is truth. Now, 41,000 people and died so far, according to Hamas. These are figures that Hamas provided. When it says the Gazan health authorities, it means Hamas, because Hamas has been essentially the political leadership of Gaza since 2005. When Israel left, they essentially evacuated Gaza, and they left the infrastructure behind and the likes. And it's not my intention to go through the whole Palestinian question today. But just to say, at that point in time, Hamas was really in charge of Gaza, and they had built tunnels, kilometers, miles of tunnels, with funds that they've got, aid funds from all over the world, billions of dollars. And these were used to build tunnels from which they were then looking to attack Israel. And since then, it was really a war between the IDF going into Gaza and Hamas operatives that were operating from these tunnels. And so the warfare that the IDF was waging in Hamas was very much unconventional. So you had an enemy that were operating not in army-to-army combat, but really operating from tunnels and ensconced in or hiding in a urban area. So there was no separation between how many of these people that died were Hamas operatives and how many were innocent civilians. And the narrative out there is these are innocent civilians. 41,000 babies and women were savagely murdered by the IDF. But then the reality is very much different. There are reports that were prepared on comparing the IDF's operations in Gaza with other military operations that are similar. And normally the combatant to civilian ratio in similar warfares can be up to 1:9. One operative or one militant or terrorist or whatever you want to call it, to an innocent civilian, the ratio can be anything up to 1:9. In the case of this particular war, IDF maintains that, or Israel maintains that, half of these numbers at least is combatants, it's militants. And therefore the ratio is rather 1:1. It's not to say that it's not sad that people have died, but I think it's important as Christians in particular that we understand, we read behind the news, and we begin to be informed and not just parrot what the leftist media is telling us. Now, the next story I want to then talk about, you see a picture there to the left, and that's a picture of a man called Yahya Sinwar. Now, Yahya Sinwar was really the leader of Hamas operating from Gaza, and he was eliminated or killed a month or two ago. And this article is published on the 18th of November. And what you see there, it says that it's a picture of Sinwar as the portrait of him, the Hamas leader, in Palestine Square in Tehran. Tehran Tehran in Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it says that the families of American victims, so they were on October 7, they were not only Israelis, they were victims from all over the world that were killed. That people that were in Israel, people that were at the Noah festival and so forth. And the victims of the families of the victims of this assault included Americans. So it says here the families of American victims of the October 7th terror assault led by Hamas last year filed a suit on Sunday in a federal U.S. court against Iran and an array of linked terror groups. So these families were essentially now filing a lawsuit against Iran, and they claiming that Iran is essentially behind all of these proxy wars or behind these militant groups. And then if I can just maybe highlight a few things here. It says the suit, which has been seen by the Times of Israel, I got this article from there, relies on what attorneys representing the plaintiffs say are secret documents uncovered by lawyer Gary Orson showing the Iran's Islamic Republic, a Revolutionary Guard Corps, essentially Iran's military, funneling millions of dollars to Hamas. So the accusation here is that what happened in October 7th was really financed by Iran. I think it's an interesting perspective, and I think an important one for us to have. The next point I want to make is that, as I alluded to, there are more than one group that is fighting against Israel. Now, on the left, you find a picture there. It's dated October 10th this year, and it's a picture of missiles being intercepted by the Israeli defense systems, and I'll speak about that in a moment. But the title says Iran's multi-front battle, how Tehran is feeding an octopus war against Israel, analysis. Now, this picture of an octopus, if you can imagine, an octopus has different, arms, at least 8 arms, as I understand it. I'm not a biologist. But now this octopus has the ability then to be in one place to be in many places at the same time, so to speak, if you can use that analogy. Now, if you look at the picture to the right, what it shows you there's this tiny sliver of land that's in blue there. That's Israel. And you find also Gaza, which is the Gaza Strip where Hamas has been in power since 2005. On behalf of the Palestinian people, as it's called. I refer to them as Arab Muslims or Arabs, but let's use the term behalf the Palestinians. And then in the West Bank, which is basically the biblical Judea and Samaria. So if you look at the Bible calls these lands Judea, Samaria, Galilee, and so on. And so Judea and Samaria is now called the West Bank. It's on the west bank of the Jordan, and that's where it gets its name from. So the West Bank is essentially, by and large, controlled or run by the PLO, by the Mahmoud Abbas government. And so this is not controlled by and large, by Israel, and therefore there's also a tax that comes from the West Bank. Then you have on the northern border of Israel, you have Lebanon, and that's where Hezbollah is. So Hezbollah is on the northern border of Israel, the southern border of Lebanon, and the Lebanese government is not fighting with Israel. It's important to understand that. This is not a fight between Lebanon, the Lebanese government, the Lebanese army, and Israel. This is a fight between a militant group and Israel. Now, this militant group called Hezbollah is as strong as most armies in the world, and it has been funded by Iran for many years. Now, Israel considered this their biggest threat. And as I mentioned earlier on, it was by divine intervention, one might say, that on the October 7th, there wasn't coordination between Israel and Hamas, because otherwise we might have had a very different conversation in terms of what happened to the Jewish people. So then you also have Syria, you have Iraq, that there's also militant groups, and then you have Yemen, that there's the Houthis as well. So these groups are all then funded by Iran. And in Lebanon, for example, Hezbollah is like a government within a government. And I'm sharing a lot of information. I hope that the effort and time that I've put in this and the research I've done over the last year or so is of benefit to you. And you then do your own research and inquire to understand if what I'm saying is true. We have in the Bible an account of a man called Paul the Apostle. Now, Paul was a great apostle, but he also he went and did his message, his preaching, to a group called the Bereans. And the Bible says the Bereans went to look at the scriptures to see whether what Paul was saying was in fact true. So I challenge you to do your own research and to see whether what I'm saying is in fact true. So the point I'm making here is on the 10th of October, Iran itself attacked Israel, and it was only the second time that they did so. They did so in April as well with missiles, and you had then the US and I think also European countries actually supporting Israel to defend themselves, and they have defense systems. The Iron Dome, it's called, the David Sling is another one, to intercept missiles at different distances and so forth. But the point to make here, the reason I'm spending so much time on this, I think it's important to understand that Israel is facing an existential war. From an Iran perspective, they're seen as the Zionist entity, not a sovereign state, which they are. They are a sovereign state. They've been a sovereign state since 1948. But the idea is to wipe Israel from the map. And I think it's very important as a Christian and as someone that is fairly minded and wants to search for truth, whether you're Christian or not, to understand this context. Now I want to then continue diving a little bit deeper into the Hezbollah angle as well. So this is taken from The National, an article that came out a couple of months back. It says the biggest events in Israel-Hezbollah war, from Nasrallah skilling to attacking Netanyahu residence. So Netanyahu's residence was attacked, I think a month or two ago, by a drone, and it so happened that he was not at the house, and the intention of that attack was obviously to eliminate Netanyahu, and that happened after some events that. So this was really in response by Iran or by Hezbollah in response to what happened before then. So subsequent to the war in Gaza, which Israel by and large won, essentially destroyed the leadership, the almost entire leadership of Hamas. There are still some Hamas leaders that are at the moment, my understanding, in Turkey. They were previously in Qatar. So now they have moved to Turkey, but essentially the Hamas military infrastructure has been decimated. Its leadership has been decimated, and that's where that war is. But now Israel then shifted its focus over the last couple of months to strikes, significant strikes, military strikes, airstrikes in Lebanon as one of the focus areas of this particular war. And on September 17, and then the day after that, two significant events happened. On September 17, thousands of people that had pages were essentially attacked by Israel. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So years ago, Nasrallah, at his command, at his guidance, leadership, decided to move from digital to more of an analog technology. In other words, instead of using cell phones, the idea was then to go back to pager technology and walkie-talkies to communicate between himself or his leadership structure, and then also the middle level and other senior commanders. So on the 17th, about 3,000 people were wounded and about 12 were killed, according to this report. And the idea was Israel was doing a precision strike to take out the Hezbollah infrastructure. And you may ask me, I'm talking about these things, as a Christian. I mentioned this left and right values. Is the idea not to love your enemies, to turn the other cheek and so forth? I think that's important in the context of, your walk as a believer. But as I mentioned, there's a balance. There's truth and mercy goes together. The Bible says righteousness and justice are the foundation of God's throne. And if you look at Romans 13, you can read it for yourself. It talks about the role of government, that government is the sword that God has appointed. It has authority to uphold laws, to uphold the rule of law. And so from a government perspective, the government has a responsibility to look after its citizens, to ensure the rule of law, to ensure the safety of its citizens that are the tax-paying citizens of the country. And I think that's how you must understand these comments that I'm making today. So the next day, about 25, another attack happened, and this time it was to do with walkie-talkies. And another group of people, it says the lethal attacks killed a total of 37 people and wounded thousands, dealing significant blow to Hezbollah's fighting force after the attacks announced that a new phase of the war in northern Israel and Lebanon had begun. So Israel took the decision to not only take out physical infrastructure, weapons infrastructure, financial infrastructure. They bombed buildings where there were money as well. There were weapons. They had a lot of intelligence built up over the years about where exactly Hezbollah's infrastructure is. But also at the same time, or around about that time, they took out the leadership of Hezbollah, which basically crippled their ability to then respond. And then on the 27th of September, after Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, which has been a nemesis for the Israelis and the IDF for about 3 decades, he then was also eliminated. And this happened whilst Prime Minister Netanyahu was actually in the UN making a speech. And at that time, some say that Nasrallah might have even been watching the speech whilst there were bombs dropped on his bunker, and him and a number of leaders were eliminated. Also, his successor was. So I'm saying that to you just to give you a sense of what's happened before, where is it going to go next, what is the impact, will there be peace, are we living at the end, will this conflagrate further to a war, a wider war, and so on. Now, the last point I want to make here on this Israel war, before I read a portion of scripture, is this article here that says Israel Hezbollah agreed to ceasefire brokered by the US and France to take effect on Wednesday. And I've read some commentators, including Amir Sarfati, in the last couple of days, and he was very disappointed with this ceasefire, because he was saying, look, they are at the point of essentially destroying Hezbollah and being able to get their citizens to go back, because thousands of Israelis had to leave their homes, and they've not been at their homes for about a year now. And they are unable to go back to their homes because Hezbollah is still on the border. So Biden and also then the president of France, Macron, were, from what we understand, instrumental in brokering this peace or ceasefire, which one might say wasn't necessarily welcomed by Netanyahu, but essentially almost forced on him, because the US, over the last year, they've supported Israel, but at the same time also stopped him from doing things. Don't go into Rafah, don't do this, don't do that. We're going to withhold weapons and so on. So it's been a very difficult period for Israel, because this war, the displacement of people, so much of suffering, could have been alleviated in some ways by having this conflict shortened or concluded much shorter, and potentially saving lives. We know that thousands of people, some might say hundreds of thousands of people, were displaced, and that could have been mitigated. But according to this report, Biden, who's now been voted out of or basically going to be leaving the White House, and I'll talk about that in a moment. He has now, as part of a parting shot, effectively got this ceasefire. And let me read what he says here. It says this is 27th of November, so it's about 2 days ago. This is designed to be a permanent cessation of hostilities, Biden said. What is left of Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations will not be allowed to threaten the security of Israel again. Israel will gradually withdraw its forces over 60 days as Lebanon's army takes control of territory near its border with Israel to ensure that Hezbollah does not rebuild its infrastructure. Civilians on both sides will soon be able to safely return to their communities. Now, again, like I said, some people, dispute that, because some say, Hezbollah and the Lebanese army, there's not always easy to separate one from the other. And now the Lebanese army is going to be part and parcel of this ceasefire agreement, and it's not going to last. If you look on the right side, it's another article from the Jewish News Syndicate, and I'll just read the headline to show you what I mean. It says half of Israelis says no clear winner in the war against Hezbollah, so there's disappointment. And some 30% of Israelis think that the truce will collapse after a short time. So they don't think this is going to last, and the wars will inflate again. Then let me read then what Netanyahu says. Netanyahu faces some opposition to the deal from within his own coalition government, said the ceasefire would allow Israel to focus on the threat from Iran, replenish the depleted arms supplies, and give the army a rest, and to isolate Hamas, the militant group that triggered war in the region when it attacked Israel from Gaza last year. So Hezbollah was attacking Israel from Lebanon, and then Gaza was attacking them from the south, from Gaza. And then it says here, we will enforce the agreement and respond forcefully to any violation. Together we will continue until victory. So, interesting. It doesn't seem to me that we've seen the end of this hostilities. Now, this reminds me, as I mentioned to you earlier on, I'm doing this video not as a political commentator or geopolitical commentator. I'm doing it just from a Christian perspective, because what's happening in the world, we can have two perspectives. We can say, many perspectives, but we could say, for example, as a Christian, these things happen, there's always been war, it's nothing to see, it's not significant. Or we can be watchful, we can be awake, as Christ has commanded us. Now, conclude with that scripture, to be wise virgins. Now, if I look at Psalm 83, it says the following. You can read the whole psalm. It's a psalm of a man called Asaph. And the title of the psalm in my Bible, the New King James Version, says, Prayer to frustrate conspiracy against Israel. And it says the following, do not keep silent, O God. Do not hold your peace. And do not be still, O God, for behold, your enemies make it a melt, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty counsel against your people, and consulted together against your sheltered ones. They have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. And I spoke about this Zionist entity that will be destroyed and so forth. For they have consulted together with one consent. They form a confederacy against you. So Asaph says that these attacks is not an attack on Israel, but it's an attack against the God of Israel. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal, Ammon and Amalek, Philistia were the inhabitants of Tyre. And you can see these are some of the nations that are involved in this war. Assyria also joined them. they have helped the children of Lot, Selah. So that's the comments that I have about the war in the Middle East, the Seventh Front War on Israel. The next point I want to talk about is the rise in anti-Semitism. And again, this is a controversial topic, a divisive topic, but it does impact how we as Christians see what's happening in Israel and how we stand with the Jews and what our perspective is. And I say up front, I'm not an apologist for the Israeli government. I do not agree or have to agree with everything that they do. But I've also looked at the facts. I've considered the Palestinian question, so to speak. I've read a book by a man called Robert Spencer. It's called The Palestinian Delusion, and it talks about the history of the land from Bible times. How the Romans then renamed Judea, Samaria, and the land of Israel to be Syria, Palestina. And then also the different occupations, the Ottoman occupation. And then he talks also about more recent political events, including the different peace talks that have been held by Jimmy Carter, by George Bush, and Yasser Arafat, and all of these people. So I'm not talking from ignorance perspective, from just simply taking the Bible, and therefore I haven't considered the facts. I want to believe that I'm fairly informed. And from my perspective, the land that is some people claim is Palestine is the ancient land of the Jews. It's the land of Israel, the same piece of land that was promised to Abram, and where the Jews have been through centuries, based on even accounts by Mark Twain. If you read this book by Robert Spencer, he talks about how Mark Twain came to Israel which was called Palestine at the time, and under the Ottoman Empire, before it became under the British mandate, and how the land was deserted. There was nothing. It was completely deserted. And so I think it's important that before we spout of things like the Zionists, the colonizers, and so forth, that we actually have the facts. And that's where I end up with this topic of the rise in anti-Semitism. Because of these different narratives that the Jews are colonizers, they've never been there, they came from Poland, they have no history of the land, which is not factually true. So because of that, and also the leftist ideology that the oppressor and the oppressed, and Israel is the colonizers, the Jews are the colonizers, they're oppressing the Palestinian people. So what you see around us is influenced by this narrative. And I think it's important that a person of reason, a person that holds on to facts, a person that holds on to the biblical narrative are informed. And even if you do support Israel, you support it based on the biblical command to support them, but also on the basis of the facts. And there's so much of lies that are being told about the Jews that informs this. So we've seen post the October 7th attacks that there was an uprising in pro-Palestinian protest. And some people very early on after the attacks have actually celebrated the horrific attacks. And I have been exposed to some of the video content, and it's horrific. And some people have said, no, it never happened. The IDF killed their own people. There was no, abuse and anything of the sort. So since then, there's been these campus protests in the US, and that's then also exploded onto other parts of the world and so forth. We've also seen social media, different, commentary, very vitriolic comments on Jews and, different tropes being shared, as it were, in this respect. And so it hasn't abated. I came across a report or a commentary on this report by the report being compiled by the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. Now, the ADL is a New York-based non-governmental organization or NGO and it's set up to combat anti-Semitism and bigotry and racism and so on. And it has done studies or kept a track of anti-Semitic incidents since about 1979. So incidents, anti-Semitic, Semitic being anti-Jews, on the basis of them being Jews. And according to the report by the study by the ADL, since about 7 October to 24th September of this year, 7 October last year to 24th September this year, there was the highest ever incidence of anti-Semitism, about 10,000 different incidents. Then we've seen a couple of incidences which I want to just spend a little bit of time on. The one has been an uprising in Amsterdam in the last couple of weeks at a soccer match where, and I'll talk about it in a moment, where Palestinians, pro-Palestinians attacked Jews, and there's been a different narrative, and I'll show you the different narrative on that. There was also 85,000 students in the last couple of days that protested across different universities in Canada. And they also claimed this genocide in Gaza. I'll talk about the genocide claim also in a moment. And the call is calls for disinvestment from Israeli companies, businesses that are owned by Israelis or by Jews. I should say not only by Israelis, meaning citizens of Israel, but also Jews all over the world have been subjected, Jews in the US, in Europe, have been subjected to abuse, their property, and all of these things. And then there's also a call by these protesters to globalize the Intifada. Now, the Intifada, without getting too much in the woods, you can read Robert Spencer's book, really talks about the uprising, the protests, so to speak, of the Palestinians, particularly from Gaza and then also the West Bank, against Jewish, what they call occupation, the occupation of the settlers, as they say. And then one lady in particular at this Quebec function, Quebec protest, should I say, she owned a coffee shop, and she was caught on camera calling for final solution. And she also had the Heil Hitler sign. And the final solution is a very inflammatory thing to say, which basically means the extermination of the Jews, as Hitler was calling for. She was then sanctioned by the people who owned this franchise. She's a franchisee, but I'm just telling you that's kind of the where we are at the moment. Now, here is an article that dates back to July. I'm just going to go through a couple of articles here. It says that the US accuses Iran of seeking to exploit American Gaza protests. Now, the point of this, and I'll read a little bit about the article, the point also to understand, as someone who wants to dig deeper into truth, as a Christian who wants to be informed when we take positions, is that it's been alleged that the protests that we see on campuses are not necessarily organic. So if you look at this picture, for example, you see the tents that have been, and these are expensive tents and also paraphernalia used to protest. It's clear that these students didn't all go to the same shop to buy these tents and paraphernalia. Someone is funding it. Someone is guiding them. Also, if you look at how they engage with the media, they point to a spokesman. They don't necessarily, if you I've seen many videos of freelance journalists approaching people like Maya Tusi and others, approaching these protesters, and they're not able to articulate why they're protesting. Why is there genocide in Gaza? Can you explain? What do you mean by genocide? Can you give us evidence? What are these things that you are particularly concerned about? What about the hostages? Can you tell us what should happen with the hostages that are still there? 102 hostages that are still there. And they can't. Then they refer to their leaders. And this article says here, it's the U.S. intelligence chief on Tuesday accused Iran of edging on protesters inside the United States against the Gaza war, including by paying demonstrators. And that's what people are saying. Some of these demonstrators are are paid. So Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, stressed that she was not alleging that Americans taking to the streets against Israel or U.S. policy were insincere or doing Iran's bidding, but said Iran was stepping up efforts. So she's saying, look, there might be people that are sincere, that are really concerned, that are on the left and feeling that something has to be done, what they see is injustice. But there's also other people that are actors that are actually edging this on. And she says that in recent weeks, Iranian government actors have sought to opportunistically take advantage of ongoing protests regarding the war in Gaza, using a playbook we've seen actors use over the years, Hines said in a statement. So I just want to also put that out to you. I can't go through the entire article just in this time, but I just wanted to show you that I'm not just spouting things. These are media articles, some articles on the left, some articles on the right, and somehow there's truth that at the base of what is being said. Here I've got these articles dealing with the soccer match. So this happened in Amsterdam, where there was a club called Maccabi, which is Maccabi Tel Aviv, as I understand it, which is basically an Israeli team, Jewish team, and then there's also the Ajax fans. So there was this uprising, and let me read through these articles. So the World Brief says anti-Semitic attacks target Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam. So she's this lady, Alexandra Sharp, it looks like. She's characterizing this as anti-Semitic. Then you see in the middle, the mayor of Amsterdam. She initially categorized this attack as a pogrom, which is basically an attack, coordinated attack against Jews. Now, she then comes back a couple of days later saying, no, she misspoke. It wasn't a pogrom. And so you can see the different narratives at play. So it says, Helsima said Israeli government and Dutch officials used term as propaganda by discriminating against Dutch Muslims, says Israeli fans also behaved badly. So now the narrative was, look, these Israeli fans burned Palestinian flags and therefore they kind of caused this, and it's not really anti-Semitic, it's something else. And then some of the information I got from people like Amir and others, they actually show you that Mossad actually knew about this before it happened. And they tried to warn the Dutch government, and this didn't go anywhere. And so it was a planned attack. It wasn't just a soccer violence, as it were, such that the Israeli government actually had to then send a plane. I don't know if it's one plane or more than one plane, to go and actually get its citizens out of Amsterdam, because there were many different supporters that were there coming to support their team in this. I think it's a UEFA match it was. And it says here, the mayor of Amsterdam says that she regrets the use of the word pogrom, describes the wide coordinated attacks against Israel, describing the attacks. She says here, boys on scooters crisscrossed the city in search of Israeli soccer fans. It was a hit and run. So that just doesn't make any sense. So here boys on scooters going to search for Jews. They were hunting Jews. So it wasn't, look, you're a fan of the other team. You may or may not be a Jew, and I'm just angry at you. No, they actually went and looked for people's passports to make sure that they are Jews. Then Halsima's remarks drew quick criticism from the Israeli foreign minister, Gordon Saar, who said on X in both English and Hebrew that the mayor's words were utterly unacceptable, adding, the failure that occurred on that night must not be compounded by a further grave failure, a cover-up. Hundreds of Israeli fans who came to watch a football match were pursued and attacked, targeted by a mob asking for their passports to check if they were citizens of the Jewish state. There is no other word than this, program. So there you have it. So again, another important development, the increase in anti-Semitism. Now, again, also, for me to do this video, it's taken a lot of courage. I think it's easier to just, stay under the radar, not speak up, not stand with the Jews. And the pressure is, there's this mainstream narrative and, there is genocide, the Jews are bad, they've always been bad, all of that. And so if you look at what's happened throughout history, there's a man called Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I'm going to show you. I've got his book here. It's called the Cost of Discipleship. The Cost of Discipleship. So I got to know about Dietrich Bonhoeffer when I was listening to Eric Stakelbeck, because Eric Stakelbeck also wrote a book trying to take lessons from Dietrich Bonhoeffer in terms of where we are as Christians in the culture and the need for us to be disciples. And so one of the quotes of Dietrich Bonhoeffer is, he says, salvation is free. Jesus died for our sins. He paid the price. Salvation is by grace through faith in the atonement. We're not saved by works. So salvation is free by grace through faith. But he says discipleship will cost you everything. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was one of the few people in the 1930s who actively spoke up for the Jews. The rest of the church were quiet. They didn't want to speak up. They went with the Nazis. They also were complicit in this. And I'm not saying this to be judgmental. I'm saying Genesis 12, the command that the Lord has given us. He says, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. We are commanded to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, to bless his people. Yes, I understand the Jews today haven't accepted Jesus as Messiah. The Bible says they will in due season, they will accept him. When the fullness of the Gentiles is coming, Paul says in Romans 11, the Jews will be saved. So I think it's important for us to understand these things in context, understand the heart of the Lord, that we are supposed to entice the Jews to jealousy through our faith and our public declaration of Jesus Christ as the King of the Jews, as the Messiah of the Jews, the one who died and rose again the third day, who's coming again in glory. So I just wanted to add that today I'm just really speaking from my heart. I have some notes here, but I'm really speaking as I believe the Lord leads me. Now, the reason I mentioned all of that was that Christians are also coming under attack for supporting Jews. There's a whole group, there's millions of evangelical Christians all over the world that have been praying for the Jews, for the nation of Israel, for the leadership of Israel. Now, here's a story. It says protesters vandalize Netherlands office of pro-Israel Christian group. I'm going to read there. It says, activists at demonstration led by Extinction Rebellion and other groups dub slogans on premises of Christians for Israel intimidate staff arriving for work on genocide claims. So it says that the protest at the Christians for Israel Center in the central Dutch city of Nijkerk came weeks after the country was the site of attacks on Jewish Israeli soccer fans by pro-Palestinian activists in what officials described as an anti-Semitic pogrom, right? And then it says the protesters in Nijkerk defaced a building where Christians for Israel is based, spray painting slogans that accuse Christians for Israel members of supporting genocide and being child murderers and complicit in events in Gaza. So here, the protesters has brought into this narrative, which if you really study the facts, there is no basis for what they say. But they've brought into this narrative that the media has portrayed. And now that is now turned into violence against, it's gone from protest, peaceful protest, to violence against Christians who, based on their own convictions and understanding of truth, who stood with the Jews are now being attacked. And I think it's important to also be aware of that. There's different views in the body of Christ today, and often not informed by facts and different theologies and I'll talk about it in my second video. Now I want to, I know this is a longer video. I hope you would stay till the end, and even if you have to watch it in parts, I really do, I have it on my heart to really do this video today. Now, the next one article there, it says ICC arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant for Gaza war crimes. So here, what's happening here is that the ICC is basically the International Criminal Court. And I watched a video a couple of days back from an Australian lawyer who was part of setting up this ICC. And the idea was this court would really govern on crimes against humanity, genocide, racism, other types of violence, and so on, discrimination, where there weren't functioning courts in different countries. So this was never supposed to override the democratic structures in a democratic sovereign state. And now this is now weaponized, in my view, against Israel. Now the idea was that this man, Karim Khan is his name, he filed this motion to have the Prime Minister of Netanyahu and also the previous defense minister Gallant, accused of war crimes for what's happening in Gaza, principally, is my understanding, and then also claims of starving people in Gaza, of being indiscriminately bombing people and so on. People have come out and said there's no basis. The facts doesn't bear it out. And then also another man called Mohammed Dave, which is the guy, the brains behind the Gaza attack, Israel attack, was also then being arrested, but the man is no longer alive. So it became farcical. So what's happened is some countries came out and said they will support this. They will arrest Netanyahu if he were to step into their country. And other countries like Hungary, like Argentina, have said no, they are not supporting it. France came out in the last day or so saying that they will not arrest the Israeli officials because Israel is not a signatory to this court, and therefore they have immunity because they're not bound by this decision in terms of not being a member of this court. Now the U.S. This is now in an article by a man called Lindsey Graham, or not an article by him, but he's quoted in this article by the Middle East Monitor, and this is on the 25th of November. It says U.S. Senator threatens sanctions on any Western ally that complies with ICC's Israel arrest warrant. Now, again, there will be different narratives. Why is the U.S. doing this? There's some agenda that the U.S. has, and so forth. Now, I'll explain to you why the U.S. is doing this. The U.S. is not a member of this court, as is Israel. They are not signatories to this court. They have their sovereignty. They don't want their sovereignty to be overridden by another court, to which could make arbitrary decisions against them. So, in the context of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Israel is seen as the little Satan, and America is seen as the big Satan. So, in other words, it's a case of Israel first and then America second. So, even Biden came out and saying, no, we will not abide by this. And the senator is basically saying that they're going to be pushing for sanctions against countries that basically adhere to this. And there's likely to be sanctions also against officials of the ICC. So I think it's important that you also get this perspective, because I've seen on Facebook people celebrating on social media, like, this is a great victory and this and so on. It may be a Pyrrhic victory because there will be opposition against that. And the opinion of many countries, like I said, France has come out against it. The US very much is still the dominant superpower in the world. They are not supporting this. The last story I want to then talk about under the rise in anti-Semitism is the one that I have. It says the UN, United Nations, is firing the this lady called Nedrito. So her name is Alice Nedrito. She's from Kenya, and she is the special advisor to the United Nations. United Nations being an international body consisting of different nations and having certain powers, if you like. So the United Nations has got an organ that is called the International Court of Justice, and this court is supposed to adjudicate disputes between nation states. Now, South Africa has lodged a case last year against Israel, again claiming that Israel has committed genocide, and they've done all these horrible things in Gaza, and therefore the war should stop and Israel should be sanctioned. I'm not going into the details of the case. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm just giving you, the high level background. So Israel then responded, and they are not, again, my understanding, they didn't need to, because again they're not a party to the ICJ, is my understanding, but they responded because they obviously didn't want to have these claims go untested, and their position is no, there is no genocide. They've been particularly meticulous about how they go about the war. They've been meticulous about ensuring that aid goes into Gaza. They're maintaining that Hamas is using the aid, stealing the aid, and then selling it. And that's the Israel narrative, and you can decide who you want to believe. Now, why I thought this was interesting, this is a report from the Jerusalem Post, and the Jerusalem Post is quoting the quoting the Wall Street Journal, which is a very illustrious publication in the US. Now, it says that this lady, Nedrito, she was fired. Her contract was not renewed, or effectively she was fired because she didn't agree that there was genocide. Just think about that. She is the special advisor on genocide at the UN, and she says there is no genocide in Gaza. And she's the one that prepared a paper. It says there, the publication cited a 2022 paper on when to refer to a situation as genocide, which affirms the importance that the United Nations officials adhere to the correct usage of the term. Okay, and then she says her paper stated that this was necessary due to the term's frequent misuse in referring to large-scale grave crimes committed against particular populations, the emotive nature of the term, and political sensitivity. So it's basically saying the term is being misused. And then it goes on to say the term genocide encapsulates the Holocaust, which I referred to previously, genocide perpetrated by the Hutus on the Tutsis in Rwanda, the Serbian attacks on Bosnian Muslims, and the killings carried out in Sudan. With regard to Israel, the Wall Street editorial noted, as a legal matter, establishing a pattern of violence as genocide requires demonstrating intent. Israel's campaign of self-defense does not qualify. I'm going to read that again. It says the Wall Street's own editorial, their opinion, stated that there's no intent, and it's a campaign of self-defense. So I think that's very important to understand. So then I'm going to the next area that I'm going to be talking about is the U.S. election of 2024. Again, I benefited a lot from the podcast that I've listened to. So I hope you've received benefit from this video so far. If you have received benefit, please like, share, and also subscribe to the channel. It just helps us to get the message out. This has been the longest message that I've recorded so far on this channel, and it's really something that I believe the Lord has laid on my heart. I've spent about a year and a half following various events, and it's just interesting to me that this is now culminated in this video. The last point that I mentioned 4 global events. So the last one that I want to talk about is the US elections. The United States has just gone through an election process where it's essentially elected a president. It's a very complex process where they have two presidential candidates that then, have raised very much a public race, and then based on their running mates and whoever's on their ticket, then the results follow suit. So there's essentially two parties in America: the Democrats and then also the Republicans. So again, yeah, I've followed a number of podcasts. Megan Kelly has been very helpful here to understand because she then also references the mainstream media. So watching her podcast is very informative. Also, Ben Shapiro has been great. And then a few other people that I've watched. Another guy that I've watched, which I'll also recommend, is an excellent podcast. Is one of the top ones in the world. He's a guy called Patrick Ben David, and he also covers a number of different cultural events, social events, and so on. And also from a Christian perspective, but he doesn't really necessarily cover spiritual matters. Also, he covers a whole range of issues, and I think he had one of the biggest election night audiences. Now, with regards to the election in America, essentially Donald Trump was running to be re-elected. He was the president in 2016, and then as he left the office, there was a ruckus around accusations that the 2020 elections there was some interference with, and his supporters then had some sort of uprising. I don't want to go through too much of that, but it's important to have context because this will inform what I'm going to be talking about in a few minutes. And that was called January 6 protesters. Some people were arrested. And then, that was part and parcel of the whole narrative. There was also a case against Trump for insurrection. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And so he then ran against the incumbent President Biden, the Democrat. And in about July this year, they had a debate. I actually watched the debate on CNN. I think Jake Tapper was the host, a CNN host, and then also he had a female co-host, I think Dana. I forget Dana's last name, but the two of them were the hosts. And effectively what happened, it ended up being a bit of a disaster in a sense, because up to then, Biden was presented by the media, the mainstream media, as someone that was compos mentis, was agile, really very sharp. And many people were saying in the media that there's a problem with Biden. There were some public appearances where he fell, where he was absent-minded, and there was clearly something wrong with him. But we were told by the Democrats and the media, who were essentially parroting a lot of what the Democrats were saying, they were saying, no, actually, Biden's great, there's nothing wrong with him, and so on and so forth. So on this particular night in July, what happened, the debate was so bad. You had Biden staring into space, stumbling over his words. It didn't make sense half the time. And it became quite comical, but also sad, because here was a man who clearly wasn't having it all together anymore. And then after that, he then was essentially coerced to get out of the race. He had already gotten millions of dollars in his campaign, and Kamala Harris was then under his ticket. She was the VP candidate. And then so what then happened is that there was a decision made that, in fact, what happened is Biden, as he went out the door as the candidate, as he decided to give up the race, he then endorsed Kamala Harris. And one could argue that he may have done it as sort of a backhanded compliment. Because what happened then is that Kamala started running from July, and for the first couple of days, I remember Ben Shapiro had like a clock where he had, like a calendar type thing where he showed how many days it took for Kamala Harris to actually have a proper interview. And it went on and on. I think it went into 30, 40 days. I can't recall the exact number. But she was basically trying to not engage with the media, not answering questions for, and then eventually she started to engage the media, and that was an interesting way of engaging the media, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And the reason why I mention the media so much is because it's part of the narrative that I will be talking about just now. So for Kamala, she ran on, a lot of the leftist ideology, minority protections, the woke ideology, and I'll talk a little bit about that just now. But also a key item for her was women's reproductive rights, the right to abortion, which wasn't that, Trump wasn't wasn't against abortion, but he was essentially saying there needed to be parameters around it, at limits in terms of when it can be done. And I don't want to get too much in the woods there, but there was the accusation that for the Democrats it could have been even up to the date of birth for the woman to still have this right of of abortion, and it became a big issue. Mudslinging back and forth, and Christian conservatives were saying Trump was too soft on abortion, and so you can see it became very much a vexing issue. And it's important that I say this because it also informs the narrative on how Christians, then also some Christians at least, saw Trump. Now, maybe just to continue with Kamala. Kamala also spoke about support for small businesses, particularly along black businesses, and then also pushing back against what she called price gouging. So there's this big inflation problem in America under the Biden-Kamala Harris administration. And they were saying that, the reason for that is really because businesses have become, exploiting people. And the Republicans were saying, no, that's not the case. There's actually structural problems in the economy, particularly also when it relates to energy independence. And so that leads me to what Trump was running on. He was running on the narrative that the borders have become a big problem. Millions and millions of people have come into the Americas, to North America, to the USA, illegally, and it's causing a drug problem. It's also causing, crime against women in particular. There was this one lady called Laken Riley who was, killed by an immigrant, and that also wasn't mentioned as part and parcel of the problems that normal Americans are facing. A big issue also was addressing inflation, because there was references about people not being able to afford basic foodstuffs, and this was across, the color divide, the racial divide. I watched other podcasters, YouTubers, a guy called Devori Darkins, a Black American and young guy, and it wasn't a case of race. He was also saying the same things, and there was this big divide between what the mainstream media was saying people feeling and what actually was happening. I remember one instance where a Fox News, a contributor or journalist actually went to a barber shop with Donald Trump. And then Trump spoke to people. He connected with the people in the barbershop, and these were Black and Hispanic Americans, and they warmed to him. And this was not portrayed in the media, that actually there was a groundswell of support for Donald Trump. And so also the other big issue was around the economic growth and in religious liberties, because people were feeling that, yes, there are different views on culture, but they were being forced out of their spaces, particularly when it comes to freedom of religion. There was one instance that went viral where two young guys went to a Kamala Harris rally, and they said, Jesus is Lord. And then she said, no, you're the wrong rally. And that blew up quite a lot. And so I can go on and on. I just don't want to make the video too long. It's already going on nearly 2 hours. But the point to make here is the media was a key factor in this race. And people are very divided. They were very divided before, and it's been very divided afterwards. And it was all about, Kamala Harris is a woman, is DEI, and, misogyny and racism. And that's what the mainstream media was was saying Trump is a racist, Trump is Hitler, Trump is going to, cause people to lose their rights, women to lose their rights. And I say this because I think it's important that we understand the information that we are being fed oftentimes informs how we see the world. And if we're getting the wrong information, then we're going to have wrong perspectives and make wrong decisions. And this is not only about America. I'm not an American, but this is these media articles are fed throughout the world. The same narratives are fed throughout the world, as it were. And what happened is President Trump, he won a landslide victory. One of the things that he also did is before the election, he had an engagement at a McDonald's franchise which also blew up because he then actually went and worked for a couple of minutes at McDonald's, and he really was portrayed as a man of the people. So, and that's reflected in the popular vote. I think he's the first Republican in I don't know how many years, but in quite a long time, that actually won the popular vote. In other words, getting the most votes. I got more than 75 million votes, is my understanding. He won the House of Representatives, which is basically a body of representatives from all the states in America, and then the higher body, which is the Congress, where they also won the legislature, the Congress. He also won there the majority. So Trump basically won the landslide victory. Of course, the media said no, it wasn't a landslide victory, but it was. So as part of this narrative on the media, which I think is also important to share, is that Elon Musk about 2 years ago bought X, and when I first heard about him buying X, I couldn't understand why he would do that, because he's an entrepreneur in the electric vehicle space. He's sending rockets to the moon and what is to space, should I say, and why buy a media house? And it became quite clear because he went out and changed X and made it more open to free speech, and the conversations on X became much more free-flowing, and more information was shared, to the extent that X actually became more reliable than the mainstream media, and a lot of people went to X to find information as opposed to the mainstream media. Musk also did an interview with Trump. He also eventually endorsed Trump, and he also ended up running with Trump in terms of not running as a politician, but supporting his campaign at rallies. And eventually, he and a guy called Vivek Ramaswamy, he became part of a structure called DOGE, which is basically trying to be an advisory body to the president to actually reduce the size of the state. So that's the kind of conversations that I think you need to be aware of. Then also one thing that was very interesting, Trump, on the advice of his son, is my understanding, his youngest son, he went on a podcast with a guy called Joe Rogan. It's a 3-hour podcast, and it spoke, all kinds of different things. I watched the entire podcast, and it was fascinating. It was just a 3-hour conversation, raw conversation. And it ended up getting 50 million views. Joe Rogan is actually got the biggest podcast in the world, biggest podcast audience in the world. We also invited Kamala Harris, and somehow she didn't quite make it. She had a number of softball interviews, the likes with Oprah as well, and a few other news outlets. I think CNN as well. She ended up towards the end of her campaign having an interview with a guy from I think Brett Baer is his name, who was with Fox News, and it ended up being quite a difficult interview because it was 25 minutes, and she couldn't answer a lot of the questions, and that's also what happened there. So the point is that Trump was now elected. In fact, Rogan also then endorsed Trump a day or two before the election, and I think Megyn Kelly also endorsed Trump a few days before, and she went from being very much an anti-Trumper in 2016, my understanding, to eventually changing the way she sees the world because of what was happening. So it was very much a focus on the economy, on education, defense, and foreign affairs. Trump has already started appointing his cabinet, and I'll talk about cabinet nominees that will, promote this particular agenda. And we've already seen the ripple effect of his re-election rippling through the world. He's not even elected. He's not even inaugurated yet, but there's already been changes in the world, and I'll touch on a few of those things as we move on. So the first thing I want to then talk about, I've said a lot in the lead up to this first article. So I'm going to read briefly from an article that is in, it's the AP, Associated Press article, early in the year. I think it's around July that this article appeared. And this is an article, the headline says, "Guilty. Trump becomes first former US president convicted of felony crimes." And then it says, "Donald Trump became the first former American president to be convicted of felony crimes Thursday, as New York jury found him guilty of 34 charges." This is relating to him. The allegations is that he's influenced through non-disclosure agreements the outcome of the 2016 election by trying to suppress, untoward behavior with a female. So you can read what's on the screen there. So it says here that Trump sat stone-faced while the verdicts, my apologies, was read as cheering from the street below could be heard. So in other words, it says here that he was stone-faced, and then he says the following: "This was rigged, disgraceful trial," and angry Trump told reporters after leaving the courtroom. "The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. They know what happened, and everyone knows what happened." And then Judge Merchant, who presided over this case, then decided to delay the sentencing, and eventually it was delayed till after the election because it was felt that this was really much a political trial. So I'm just sharing this with you because the reason I'm mentioning that to you is that the campaign of Trump, he was essentially in court dealing with legal cases and then having to go to rallies. So that's literally what happened. And he was also running after he was then convicted in July. Every time the media was saying, "There's a convicted criminal that you are now voting for, and this guy is also Hitler." And so you can see the level of division that unfortunately also, if you look at the media and some reports on how people reacted after the election, you can see there's still a lot of healing and mental strain that's taking place. Now here, this article here says, it talks to a conference that Trump attended. Now, it says that Trump quotes Christian vote and says, "God saved me for a purpose." And this was published, I think, 22nd of October by The Guardian. Okay? So The Guardian, a British newspaper, says that the Republican nominee reflects on assassination attempt and says, "My fate took on new meaning on July 13." So this then references an incident on July 13th where Trump was at a rally in Pennsylvania, Butler, Pennsylvania. My memory serves me well. And here he was nearly killed. What actually happened is that just at the last moment, he looked at a screen and it tilted his head. And if he didn't do that, he would have been killed. He would be dead. And so he then obviously, found that to be quite a profound, obviously, as you can imagine, was quite profound and impactful on him. And it was shocking. I mean, if it was a shocking event. Subsequent, there was another attempt on his life at a golf course, I think one of his golf courses. Now, it says here that Donald Trump urged Christian voters on Monday to participate in the 2024 election. This was a couple of days before the election, claiming that a Kamala Harris administration would restrict religious freedoms and casting himself as a protector of Christians. Again, the media is spinning this. And then it says that the event was now attended or chaired by Guillermo Maldonado, an apostle and longtime Trump rally, and who cast the election in perilous terms. And then it goes on to say, we're now in spiritual warfare, says Maldonado, talking about a fight in the spirit realm. Then it says, introducing Trump, Ben Carson, the campaign's national faith chairman for 2024 election, openly rejected the idea of a secular society. Again, there's a lot of narratives in there. It's not that Christians want to overtake America. It's really just more about religious freedom. So it says this election is about whether we are a secular nation or one nation under God. So it's really about allowing religious freedoms, allowing Christians to practice their faith, allowing the Bible in society, and the narrative of the Judeo-Christian values to have freedom, as it were. So that's just what I wanted to share with you there. Then I spoke quite a bit about the media, and this next element here, the next article I'm sharing is from a publication called Mercator, and it's written by a guy called Kurt Malberg. Now, the title of his article is The Day the Legacy Media Died. And he wrote this about 3 days after the election. And he says, today is a contest between the people who think the news is real and those who know it is not. This cheeky quip came from the pen of American author and cartoonist Scott Adams before any polling stations had closed on Tuesday. How right he turned out to be. So this guy, Kurt Malberg, is quoting this cartoonist who says that this election is a contest between the people who think the news is real and those who know it's not. What I've been saying to you earlier on. Then he goes on to analyze what happened in this particular instance, and he terms it as a eulogy on the traditional media. He says, just weeks before Americans went to the polls, Gallup revealed that trust in the mass media had reached historic lows. Just 32% of Americans told pollsters they trust the legacy news a great deal or a fair amount, a statistic that glowed in neon lights this week. Then he talks about how Elon Musk, the point I made earlier on, he says that's one of the first things that contributed to what's happened, the election result, but also the death, so to speak, of the media. So he's saying the decline in the media was brought in very stark, relief, or very much vividly illustrated, because the media told us that Kamala's winning, she's ahead, she's the good candidate, Trump is a bad one, no one wants Trump, and then it ends up that Trump had a landslide victory. So the media narrative proved to be very much a lie. And now he's saying that if he looks back, what contributed to this decline in the media, and he says one of the first things was Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter, that then contributed also to the election victory. And then he talks about the fact that the second, he says, the media's narrative that Trump is Hitler. For years, the corporate press has likened Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler, called him and his supporters fascists and Nazis, and warned that his re-election would spell the end of American democracy. And then he's got a tweet here, I think it is, Trump is Hitler, the media assured us. So why aren't they fleeing America as we speak, as so many Jews did in Germany in the 1930s? Kurt Malberg. And that's November 7th that he tweeted that out, and that he put that on Twitter. So again, I just want us to be aware of what's happening around us. It's unfortunately a time where it's not easy to find truth, easy to find, whether what people are saying to us can be trusted. Then the next one is really about what happened after the election. This gentleman called Jack Smith, he now dismissed felony charges against Trump. So he's the special counsel. He's the guy who brought a couple of cases against Trump, including the January 6th case, as I mentioned earlier on, where he was also then accused of this insurrection. So it says President-elect Donald Trump responded Monday to Special Counsel Jack Smith's move to dismiss the 2 felony cases against him. These cases, like all the other cases I've been forced to go through, are empty and lawless and should never have been brought, Trump wrote on his social media platform. It was a political hijacking and a low point in the history of our country that such a thing could happen. Could have happened, and yet I persevered against all odds and won Make America Great Again. And so essentially what's happening here is that the justice system is now saying, because Trump has been elected a president, they don't want to be persecuting or prosecuting, should I say, a sitting president, and therefore they are now going to let these charges go. So that's what we read there. Then I mentioned that since the election result, Donald Trump has moved quite swiftly in terms of appointing his cabinet. And this article here talks about 2 cabinet picks. I'll talk about another one just now. The one here is Mike Huckabee, in picture here. And then there's another man called Steve Wickoff. And I'm quoting here from The Guardian on 13th of November. It says, a U.S. election update, Trump picks a hardliner as ambassador to Israel and slew of job appointments. And why did the media report him as a hardliner? Because this man is an evangelical Christian. He's a Bible-believing Christian. And he's also a friend of Israel. He's been to Israel many, many times over the course of his life. He is a man that calls the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. He believes in the nation-state of Israel, the right of the Jews to be there, and therefore he's now seen as this hardliner. It says there, Huckabee, the former governor of Arkansas, has a track record of hardline, occasionally provocative pro-Israel rhetoric, and previously said Israel has a rightful claim to the West Bank, as I just said. Trump said in a statement he loves Israel and the people of Israel, and likewise the people of Israel loves him. Then it talks about Wickoff there and his credentials, and then it also refers to Trump having, in his first administration, moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in a move that was not welcomed by the Palestinians. Then moving on to Trump's second, another pick, he's picked a number of people. So I'm just highlighting a couple of stories here. So Trump picks a lady called Stefanik. I think her name is Elise Stefanik. Now, what's interesting here, this lady was very much, the firebrand when there was these investigations or inquiries in the U.S. On this campaign violence, and she had interrogated a number of these university presidents, and effectively engagements were so robust that at least 2 of these presidents, I remember, actually had to fall on the sword. They ended up losing their jobs because they couldn't really truthfully answer or count for what happened. Now, she was now appointed the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. So you can see here, Trump is appointing someone that is a very strong personality to the U.S., to the United Nations. And Trump is someone who's very much believes in the sovereignty of America, make America great, the nation state comes first, America comes first. And so you can already see some things are beginning to change. It says the President-elect Donald Trump has selected Elise Stefanik, New York representative for the Republican Party, to be the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations in one of his first major appointments since winning the presidential election. And then it goes on to give a little bit of background. And then at the bottom there it says, this is now a quote from Stefanik, she says, I stand ready to advance Donald J. Trump, restoration of America first, peace through strength. Peace through strength. That's a very important aspect to remember, that Donald Trump's position is he doesn't want never-ending wars. He is not against Israel essentially defending itself. He's unlikely to stand in their way and hamstrung their or second-guess their moves, military and strategic sort of operations. But at the same time, he doesn't want wars to go on forever. So it's peace through strength. And it will be using military and other means like sanctions and other things to really get his outcome. So I think it's an important thing to understand as someone who's a truth seeker, but also as a Christian, because I've also seen, media or social media posts where it's either one or two schools of thought. Some people are so excited about Trump because now some of the things that happened in the past where right was called wrong, this woke ideology, it's like people sighing in collective sigh of relief, particularly on the right. And there's also a challenge now or a danger that, it becomes unbalanced in terms of, the way that's now seen because we're still living in a fallen world. God still has a plan. Trump is not the Messiah. But on the other end, you have people who has a very different idea of Trump, and some of them even in the church, and still wants to demonize him, and others, see Trump as some sort of antichrist. And I think it's important that we have discernment as believers and truth seekers as well. So the next point I want to make here is the point that Stefanik also made about peace through strength. So yeah, one of the key things that Trump also ran on was imposing tariffs, strong tariffs on other countries to do business in America. And some people were saying this is not going to work, it will lead to inflation. And others say, no, he's not going to just indiscriminately impose tariffs. He's really using tariffs as a leverage, as a bargaining chip. And here it says, the Independent article a couple of days back, it says that Trump threatens Mexico, China, and Canada with tariffs over immigration. That was on Tuesday. It says President elect Donald Trump on Monday threatened to unilaterally impose a massive consumption tax on Americans who purchased imported goods from three of the country's top trading partners on the day he takes office, seemingly with no regard to inflation effects. As I said, there's different narratives. So this is not really the position of. I've listened to a number of commentators. It's really more of a bargaining chip. It's not that he's just going to impose sanctions. So it says here, on January 20th, as one of my first executive orders, I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States and its ridiculous open border. So really what he's trying to do here is to get Mexico and Canada to help him secure the border. And that's really what's at play here. But we've already seen the movements, and that's really the point I also want to make. Another aspect I want to raise, and my point as a Christian, is to pray for our leaders, to pray for the leaders in my country. The Bible says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and heal their land. So we are commissioned to pray for our leaders and then also to pray for global leaders. And I do believe the election of President Trump is a reprieve. The America affects the way the world goes in so many different things: culture, economics, the Middle East, safety and security, so many different things. And I believe that the American election has a net positive effect, particularly if you hold a Christian worldview. I'm not saying Donald Trump is the Messiah. I don't believe that. Jesus Christ is the Messiah. But it does provide a window of opportunity, also particularly for preaching the gospel. And I will talk about that in a second video when I talk about how we should then relate to these things. But one of the things I also want to put forward to you watching this video, whether you are South African or an American, is to pray. I've certainly, my wife and I, we've prayed for this presidential elections. We prayed many, many times, many days, months. We prayed for it, as we are also praying for Israel. And here's one topic to pray for, because between now and January, there's a window, and there's a lot of things that are happening that can also be scary. So here is an example of that. It says, several of Trump's cabinet nominations, other appointees are targeted with violent, un-American bombed threats. This is from the New York Post, and it's 2 days ago. It says President-elect Donald Trump's incoming cabinet members and other political appointees have been targeted with bomb threats. A transition team spokesman revealed as Caroline Levitt. She says, last night and this morning, several Trump's cabinet nominees and administration appointees were targeted in violent anti-American threats to their lives and those who live with them. And then on the right there, I've got a tweet from the office of the chairwoman Stephanie, which I spoke about a while ago. It says, this morning, Congressman Elise Stefanik, her husband, and their 3-year-old son were driving home to Saratoga County from Washington for Thanksgiving when they were informed of a bomb threat to the residents. New York State County law enforcement and the Capitol Police responded immediately. Then it goes on to share best wishes and prayers and so forth. So it's important for us as believers to be aware of the prophetic events that are happening around us. The scripture teaches us that we are in the end times. The end times started 2,000 years ago, but we also are told by Christ to watch the signs of the times, and that these signs are like birth pains that increases in intensity. And certainly there's many things that have happened. We've seen the restoration, the rebirth of Israel in 1948, and since then we've seen many different things happening, and it's almost like an acceleration of the prophetic things that are happening all around us. And so we've seen the great falling away of the church, as well as I mentioned earlier on, and we've seen the wars and rumors of wars that Christ Jesus spoke about, the fight by ethnic group against ethnic group. We look at Matthew 24. We've also seen the preaching of the gospel. Jesus says, all these things will happen, and yet the end it is not. And he says that the gospel will be preached to the ends of the earth, and then the end will come. So for me, it's important that we are awake. In the next video, I will talk about 4 groups of people that there are many different groups of people, but I've just dealt with 4 categories of people that have different responses to what's happening around us in the world. And I will be talking about that in the context of this video. But as I close, I want to read a scripture. It says the following: then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them, but the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, behold, the bridegroom is coming, go out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise answered, saying, no, lest there should not be enough for us and you, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, assuredly I say to you, I do not know you. So the bridegroom in this instance is a picture of Christ, and the bride are those believers that have been waiting and faithfully watching and living for Christ. It says here, watch therefore, for you know neither the day or nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. The Son of Man is the favorite title that Jesus used to speak of himself. And that is in Matthew 25, verse 1 to 12. I'll touch on it again in the next video. I do hope you enjoyed this video, you found value out of this video. It's certainly much longer than the previous videos that we've produced on this channel. If you have found value in it, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Also feel free to use it as a resource to share with friends, or if you're in a church setting, to use it as a resource to then share with your community. And all the glory belongs to Christ Jesus. Till we see each other again. Shalom. God bless.